Thank you very much for this talk. I do everything that people ask me to do, so I'm supposed to give some comments on what I've heard, and then we're going to have a conversation. I'm not quite sure how we are doing on time, but that's not my responsibility, because I think they gave me more time than they had thought, but I think that was because the talk was so interesting. So I have 4 comments based on what he said. One of them is on tax haven, another one is on behavioral economics, a third one is on laws, and I can't remember what the fourth was, but I guess I'm going to remember when I start talking about. So the first thing is about globalization and tax havens. I think very often we underappreciate and are too little critical of the criminal activities that these tax havens actually induce. And very often we talk about organized crime, but we don't quite understand what it means. Organized crime, all crime is more or less organized. But what is meant by organized crime is enforcement of contracts among criminals. They can't go to the court system. They can't go to the court system. You owe me for this last smuggling of opium, you owe me 3 million. You can't go to a court with among criminals, but you can go to a tax haven. You can coordinate things in a way. Why? Because it's secret. And that's the reason why they play a coordinating role, enforcing contracts, making a system in the underworld. And they wouldn't be able to do that if that was the only thing they did. The reason why they admit that we only do tax evasion, but since they do tax evasion, they have this secrecy of the system that I think is important. So when we continue the conversation, I would like to hear Joe's opinion about these things, because I think they are very. I studied a little bit opium trade in Afghanistan and similar drug trade in Colombia and so on. I think these tax havens are extremely important for that. So that was the first thing. The other thing, and maybe that was the one I forgot about to mention in the introduction, that is fake news or fake information. I think one element of that is not observed enough, that I would like to hear your opinion about, that is the fake presentation of sort of, say, the home pages of big companies. Take Equinor, one of the most successful companies in Norway, a company that Joe knows very well. You read the home pages and you compare what they are doing. These two things don't correspond at all. They may have a common element, but there are huge masses of things that are not really cohere. And the reason is that sort of Equinor is involved in a lot of undemocratic regimes where they help a corrupt elite to plunder the nation, to extract resources in these countries. They say that this is for the benefits of development in these undemocratic regimes, but is it? How can that be in the interest of the people there? They have no influence of the government. The government is stealing the money in most of the cases, place it in tax havens, and then to claim that this is pro-development, it's pro-Equinor, even though they don't make that much money of it, but it is really bad for the behavior, for how these countries behave, because you have these plundering activities by companies that write about themselves just as if they are really angels on the planet. They are not. They are plundering, and those who steal directly are of course the elite in the country, but those who are helping in the stealing are also guilty. And I think this we have to sort of be much more talking about social responsibility. This is the first thing, to be honest, to follow the laws and regulation. That's the first thing in corporate responsibility. The other things most likely are cosmetics, and we are focusing too much on the cosmetics, too little on the real issues. The third thing is that when we are talking about laws and regulation in these important areas, I think, and I would like to hear Joe's opinion about this, I think social organization is extremely important. I think you mentioned this deductible of bribe money. That there was a social movement in Norway, not very big one. There were ideas for a new global economy that was very active in trying to get this through in a Norwegian context, and I think this was very important. And there were similar organizations in every country, so I think that helped in when OECD finally accepted this principle. I think that these social movements were very important. And sometimes these social movements, they are a substitute for laws, and sometimes they are complements to laws, in the sense that they help enforcing the laws, in particular when you have fake news and asymmetric information in the deep sense. So my final remark is about behavioral economics, that I think is important for a lot of things, politics, globalization, development in general. But I will emphasize one thing that Joe didn't mention. Of course, it was a short talk, and that is that many people have motivated beliefs, that they sort of invest in beliefs about the world, and they have sort of start to believe. It's very difficult if you are a crook, and I think there are a lot of crooks all over the. It's very difficult to think about yourself as a crook. So then you invest in the belief that what you are doing is actually very good. And in the end, you start believing in this. So this is the role of critical, both media, investigative journalism, and economics, and other disciplines. But economics, Joe knows everything about. But I think these things are very important. That this investment in motivated beliefs. I mean, if you have invested in that, it's very difficult to change your mind, because most people have this a fallacy that they think that previous investment have to you have to follow them, otherwise it wasn't any sense of doing all this work that you have. And people believe in it after a while. And this is why critical journalism, critical economics, critical social sciences, and social organizations are very important, because people have to be shaken a little bit in our beliefs. So these are the 4 points I will hear, and we can maybe talk and engage. You are here for another 10 hours, I guess. So, but I was here in the beginning.
Okay, let me just make a few comments on each of the things that you raised. Let me maybe begin with the second point, which is the role and it's not just Equinor, but it's natural resource companies, World Bank.
I agree. It's nice to be self-critical since we are here.
In working with dictatorships to extract natural resources, where that came up very strongly in the World Bank 20 years ago was the Chad-Cameroon pipeline. And Chad was one of the worst governments, and the World Bank tried to make itself feel good about it, because they said they got Chad to agree that all the money would go to a trust fund to help the education of poor people in Chad. Well, you know where the story is going to go. 10 years later, Chad government says, well, that trust fund was just really a facade. We'll take the money and use it for our own military. And the fundamental thing about natural resources is that they're going to be there. They're not going to go away. So if you don't take them out now, they'll be there to be taken out later. If you take them out now, when there is an authoritarian government, the money is going to be squandered, and rather than being used for the people who really own the resource, they'll go to the benefit of that. So I always think that it's better just to leave them in the natural underground as an asset that the country has, typically going up in value, rather than to extract it. And when countries say, we need it to grow now, I say, get your. We know that if you have a corrupt government, you're not going to be able to grow. anyway, with a very high probability. So at least that's my view on that. Now, Kalle is absolutely right about the pivotal role, the importance of these secrecy havens. And I just want to emphasize one aspect of that, which is the real estate havens, like in the United States, and how easy it would be to address it, that it really is a political problem in the advanced countries. So at the very end of Obama's administration, he finally did something about it. Why he didn't do it earlier is something that's still a mystery. And one of the things he did, and it was limited to a few American cities, including New York, he said that if you buy an apartment in New York, or a house, that costs more than $1 million, you have to disclose the beneficial owner. There had been, this is actually, it was partly, I think, motivated by some good reporting in the New York Times, where a couple of the towers, they exposed who were owning the big apartments. A little bit embarrassing with some of our students were among the owners, from not American students, but from developing countries, poor developing countries, that managed to buy multi-million-dollar apartments. So we got a little glimpse of what was going on. And it was done just to a few cities. And the interesting thing was when they enacted this rule, didn't even require new legislation. It was just an administrative rule that the Treasury could have issued anytime it wanted. Could have done this years and years ago. The prices in New York real estate fell. And what that told you was that the dirty money was an important part of the New York real estate industry, which of course we all knew, but we got a quantitative metric of how important it was. The final point you made about motivated beliefs, again, I think is a really important one. And in the language of behavioral economics, we refer to this as confirmatory bias. That when you have a set of beliefs, information that's consistent with your prior beliefs is recognized. Information which is inconsistent with those prior beliefs is discounted. And so that makes it really difficult to change, to get a national understanding. And here's where the danger of the new social media, and in particular the dangers of, what's happened in the United States with Fox News, is there's been a polarization that people who watch Fox News, it used to be people read a whole set of media which would have all kinds of coverage. Now people read a media that is consistent with their prior beliefs. So people who read Fox News live in a world that is very disconnected from those who read the New York Times, the Washington Post, or any of the mainstream news media. So getting them to form a national consensus about what's going on, what's a lie even, what's fake news, has been increasingly difficult.
So I think some of these motivated beliefs, I think you're right, sometimes they polarize people to the extremes. And sometimes they make conflicts between organizations that are very close to each other. Because if we have sort of invested a lot in our own beliefs, but you are a Trotskyist and I'm a Stalinist, of course, viewed from outside, we are identical. but you are a threat to me, and I'm maybe a threat to you. So that these belief systems that are very close to each other, they can be very conflictual, and you see that in a lot of conflicts in the world, that these motivated beliefs, they are among religious groups, political groups that viewed from outside are very similar. Even the genocide in Rwanda was between groups. There was a lot of intermarriages. There's sort of income differences across the Tutsi and the Hutus were narrowing down prior to 1994, and they have the same language, they have the same religion. They are different in ways that are sort of, I think the Belgians made them different. The colonial power issued identity cards that made them different, and they picked out the tall ones to be the Tutsi and not so tall ones to be the Hutus. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think the point is that motivated beliefs can create a lot of conflicts, not only polarization, but also there's a tyranny of small differences, in a sense that's why debate, publicity, social organization, sort of the investigative journalism, they have to be strong. I think I don't know about any other weapon against strong, motivated beliefs. And people have to dare to be like you, more outspoken and sort of maybe controversial on behalf of their own discipline. I think that helps. So I don't know whether you have views on that.
No, I think that
this tyranny of small differences.
Well, economists always talk about differentiated products, and in the marketplace, you always try to differentiate how you are different from the other, and it's a little bit the same thing.
Yeah,
and partly, one way of thinking about it is that there are always we call ranks associated with your particular position, and so if we were perfect it highlights how bad the competitive model is. That if if we were exactly the same, we would have to share leadership. But if I can say I'm a little bit different and you're not, I could become the leader. So it becomes, we the issues of individual position and leadership and slight differences in organization get mixed together and exacerbate, I'm afraid, principal differences.
So I'm not the boss. Actually, I would love to be, but I'm not. So I don't know whether you should end here by a brief comment by each of us, or will you engage the audience, or there's going to be a dance, or I don't know.
Well, I can see that we have 5 minutes more, which means that if you'd like to, we can include the audience, take 2 or 3 questions, and then the final round
one
for
response
you.
each. I think that's a good idea.
Well, who would like to ask questions? I see one hand. We will have 3 questions, 2, and the third one. Okay. So we'll have 3 questions.
Thank you for an interesting talk. My name is Ingrid. I come from the Tax Justice Network Norway. My question concerns the role of capital controls in terms of these illicit flows. I mean, we are an NGO like Publish What You Pay. We work on transparency measures, trying to get at these illicit flows and tax havens. And the debate we don't engage with, but often find ourselves with, is that all these transparency measures don't work as long as you don't have any controls for capital. So globalization brings with it free flows of capital, and that means free flows of illicit flows as well. And then we also get confronted with the argument that no, if you try to regulate capital flows like you did during the Bretton Woods, this is what created the offshore world in the first place. So I would like your comment with the debate of around capital flows, capital controls that have emerged since the financial crisis. Do they have a function to play in trying to control these illicit flows and get at the secrecy havens, or will the transparency measures that we are trying to push, are they sufficient?
Yeah. Sure.
Hi, thank you for a brilliant performance. My name is Ishita Barra. I'm a research scientist in medicine and artificial intelligence. I know that you haven't talked and touched upon artificial intelligence today, but I have followed your work and also your statements on that. I think that the development of artificial intelligence is very closely linked to transparency. So I would like to know what kind of measures and proposals you have on that, on developing unbiased artificial intelligence.
Okay. And then the third question.
Hi, I'm Paul, and I'm a student. There's been a lot of cases where foreign investments in extraction companies has been done through export credits, and we have a Freedom of Information Act in here and in Scandinavia, but individual cases on export credits are exempt from that act. So I was wondering if you could talk about what role export credits play in fostering exploitation of natural resources in foreign countries. Thank you.
Okay. So they're all good questions. Let me maybe begin with the capital controls. I've always thought that capital controls, particularly for developing countries, were important. And it was one of the major controversies that I had with the IMF when I was chief economist of the World Bank. Our common friend Kaushik Basu, who became the chief economist of the World Bank after me, once said that my major contribution at the World Bank was reforming the IMF, and the particular thing, one of the particular things is the IMF is actually in 2010-11 came around to agree with me that capital controls were important, that instabilities of financial flows were very bad for macroeconomic stability, and so I think the analytic framework, the general policy consensus is that actually well-regulated capital flows are an important part of economic stability. What are the best instruments are a question that are still debated, and the extent of capital controls are still debated. I think both price and quantity controls are an important part of it. But even if you don't have controls, you can have public records. Those two are separate issues. You can say in order to take money out of the country, you are allowed to take money out of the country, but you have to register it. When money goes from a bank outside, that can be noted. And you can have a law that says that any transfer has to go through a bank, and that movements of cash are illegal, or movements of physical goods that are not registered, value over $1,000, are illegal. And it seems to me that if we want to control illicit flows, including tax evasion, we have to have those kinds of laws. And we obviously have the ability to monitor, and this goes back to the point, this is about politics. We have the ability to monitor. After 9/11, when people got very concerned about the flow of terrorism money, we set up a framework where we know exactly, not 100%, but we know pretty closely all the flows of illicit money that's associated with terrorism. We could do the same for all these other illicit flows if we wanted to. But we could shut down the tax havens. The tax havens are a creation. We've created them. and they're really a peculiar creation. I jokingly say, is there any attribute of the Cayman Islands that makes it a great banking center? Does money grow better in the sunshine of the Cayman Islands? And no, it's not about the sunshine that makes it a tax haven. What makes it a tax haven is that we have decided not to enforce certain laws there. And if we said every American and European bank that deals with any other bank can only deal with a bank that subscribes to exactly the same regulatory and transparency standards, it would end. It's our creation. In New York, young bankers, when they get recruited, one of the first things, you go in and you get your health insurance and your life insurance. You get an account in the Cayman Islands or one of the other secrecy havens. It's just part of standard practice. So you get into the notion of tax avoidance. And we ought to stop that. And we can stop it very easily if there's a political will and if people really understood what was going on. Artificial intelligence has many dimensions to it. One of the aspects of it is so complicated that most of us don't know what's going on in the programs, and a lot of reverse engineering. Just one thing that related to this conference that I will mention is there's been a lot of discussion of cryptocurrencies, and my view is very clearly, we have a very good currency, the dollar, and you have a good currency. The question is, why do you need another currency, Bitcoin or one of the other? But there's only one reason why people want that. It's the word crypto. And why do they want to be secretive? Well, I think the major reason they're secretive is tax avoidance and other illicit activities. So I think that we should make cryptocurrencies illegal. And I don't think our society would be an iota worse off. I think they'd be better off. And again, it would be very easy because at one point or another, all cryptocurrencies get converted into ordinary currencies. And if at that point of conversion you had a registration requirement, you would be able to destroy the benefits of the cryptocurrencies. And once you destroy the crypto part of the cryptocurrency, they would no longer be used. So to me, that's an example of a negative innovation that has really gone the wrong way. On the broad issue of export credits, I don't know what the reason for the law here is, but it seems to me that that's an example of unjustified lack of transparency. That these commercial secrets where if the government is giving an export credit or a bank is giving an export credit for a natural resource, it should be public. And especially if it's a government export credit, why should that be secret? There's a more general principle. I'm not convinced why you should need for natural resources export credits at all. These are not infant industries for the most part. These are not things where you're going to say, oh, we're going to learn something by going into this. It's not like going into a new field. The value of the resources should be able to be sufficiently great to pay for the investment. And if they're not, you really ought to ask, are you really, is this a resource worth extracting? So I think there ought to be a lot of questions about hidden subsidies for natural resource extraction.